All right, good morning. Hello, my name is Aaron Fay, and I'm here today with two other members of the Badger Anti-Racist Coalition, Gavin Lutter and Haley Madden. Welcome to the debut of our coalition's ragtag zero budget effort to create a No More Excuses rubric and accompanying toolkit for campus units to examine and evolve their anti-racist beliefs, policies, and actions. Today, we'll introduce our project and ourselves, discuss this project's evolution, and then we'll walk you through its structure and a few examples. We will then take 10 minutes for you to report on your unit's anti-racist priorities and concerns via a Padlet on your browser. We'll walk you through that. And this being the very first step in our using public feedback to revise this rubric. We're really excited. We will then take your questions. And then finally, we will describe this project's next steps and how you can further contribute. This presentation, we've joked amongst ourselves, feels like our coming out in many senses of the phrase, but especially the vulnerability it takes to unveil something that requires public support. Here, I'd like to echo something Tev Lee of the APITA Center said yesterday at day one of the Diversity Forum. And Tev Lee said, "We are just one unit. The fatigue of doing diversity work is very real, and it takes a community to do this work." And I think we all very much agree. We see this rubric as a living tool to be improved upon by anti-racist advocates at UW-Madison for years to come, and also the community. And we invite your participation. I'll now turn this over to Gavin and Haley, who will describe a bit about our coalition's membership and background. And so now I'll hand it off to Gavin.
Thanks so much, Aaron. If you could go to the next slide. Greetings, everyone. My name is Gavin Lutter. I'm Managing Director of the University Alliance at UW-Madison. And I've been kind of informally and formally participating in the Badger Anti-Racist Coalition since last summer. We're going to talk a little bit about the evolution, but before we get there, I just wanted to start and say I feel like anytime I grew up as a qualitative researcher. I got my PhD from University of Buffalo in educational leadership and policy studies. And any good qualitative researcher worth their salt starts with a good statement of positionality to say how they come to the work. So I just wanted to, of course, this is a little bit of my positionality, but also the group's positionality. We wanted to start by acknowledging the fact that there are a lot of groups and people, specifically people of color and groups of color, who've united together, who have done a lot of work. The BIPOC Coalition at UW, the NINA Collective, the Black Liberation Collective have all done a lot of work, but we're also standing on the shoulders of a bunch of different people who do anti-racist work around the country. We scoured the internet and found a lot of wisdom out there that a lot of people of color have put down on paper. And so we're trying to give that life here and allow us to be able to kind of gain from their perspective and wisdom. And I think it's interesting that a lot of us identify as community engagement professionals because we try to adopt that orientation of the world, that the university is not the only one who has formal or worthy knowledge, but we think that the community actually has a lot of wisdom out there. In particular, in this presentation, we're going to be presenting a lot of that wisdom of people of color that has been documented through different efforts. And just to be clear, we are mostly a white group of community engaged professionals thinking about racial consciousness. I myself come to this work as an LGBT cisgender male, and a lot of people on our coalition are also cisgender. So we approach the work in the way that we have open hearts. We're trying to understand the world, and we're also in communication with a lot of people of color. Certainly, we are not a totally 100% white group, but most of us are white. So I just wanted to say that we come to this work with humility, and we believe that we have something to contribute, that we can't just kind of wash our hands and be like, yep, that's people of color's job to help us get racially conscious. And we as a group of mostly white people are trying to do our part. So with that, humble, hopefully you all read that as a humble beginning. I'm going to pass it off to my great colleague, Haley Madden.
Thank you, Gavin. Good morning, everyone. My name is Haley Madden. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Assistant Director of Community Engaged Scholarship at the Morgridge Center for Public Service. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of our ragtag group, as Aaron said, and tell you a little bit about how our project started. So this small group evolved from a larger group called the Community Campus Connectors. So that larger group, C3 for short, we love a little acronym on campus. We've been meeting for over 5 years with units that support community engagement at UW. So this larger group meets to share what our units are doing, collaborate on projects as needed, and advocate for institutional support for quality community engagement across the university. So we meet quarterly as a large group, but we also meet in smaller groups to work on projects. So our smaller groups have been working on racial justice projects, but the murder of George Floyd in the summer of 2020 pushed us forward with greater intensity. In the summer of 2020, the subgroup, now called the Badger Anti-Racist Coalition, started to meet more regularly to talk about racial justice and to see what work we could do in our own roles to work towards being an anti-racist campus. To be honest, this started because we were frustrated. We were frustrated with the lack of meaningful response from our society, but also we wanted a more meaningful push towards racial justice from our own campuses and our own units. And we also wanted to see what we could do to leverage the power and opportunities that we had. For years as community engagement professionals, we had not only read about the ways that higher education institutions perpetuate systemic oppression within their walls, and in the communities in which they are placed, but we have seen, heard, and felt these effects. From students and staff sharing microaggressions they encounter on a daily basis, to our colleagues of color disproportionately bearing the burden of equity and inclusion work that was undervalued and uncompensated, to our community partners telling us that our students are unprepared to be in community in a way that is humble, empathetic, self-aware, and appropriate. We saw these effects, we felt these effects, and we wanted to do what we could to create a better university. Although we're critical of what's going on in higher education and of the work that even our own institution is doing, it's really coming from this place of love and the desire to move things forward positively, to create a more just campus, to create more justice within our own units, and to push ourselves further as people. So I want to note a couple of things here. The structure that this group has is based on deep trust relationships that have been built over months and years. We were able to dive into meaningful work pretty quickly because we trust each other immensely. This means that we can speak openly and honestly without fear, be vulnerable, support each other, and push each other forward positively. Second, racial justice and anti-racism were not new concepts for any of us, so we had some common language and a common starting place. While doing reading, having a book club, and just discussing social topics is really important and lays the groundwork for future work, this particular group was ready for more action. So we started by listening, getting ideas for where we could be most useful, doing more research. We looked specifically for this project, we looked at over 24 resources that tied our theory and practice in this work to community and academic experts. As I said, a part of this work has been listening to students and amplifying their voices and demands where we can, such as the Wisconsin Black Student Union and the UW BIPOC Student Coalition, who have successfully done collective organizing and action to do really important work, such as the removal of Chamberlain Rock on campus, but they also have many other demands that have not yet been met. So this is the background for how this group started, and as we started meeting, discussing ideas, thinking about where we could best use our collective talents, some ideas started to form.
All right, thank you, Haley. So in summary, BARC is a non-UW affiliated group of community engaged professionals working to amplify demands of BIPOC-led organizations and co-lead liberatory initiatives, including this rubric. So our current mission includes 3 points. 1, moving beyond statements of solidarity to campus actions that are anti-racist and work against white supremacy at UW. 2, leveraging our power at UW to work towards dismantling white supremacy at our institution and in our community. And 3, building upon decades of work by BIPOC-led organizations and aligning our work with their current goals and actions. We see ourselves as a radical group, and we're looking to expand the boundaries of what is possible in supporting anti-racist action here at UW. To be clear, we're not being compensated for our labor here, and at times we've faced resistance from colleagues and campus leaders for our efforts. Leaders have entered our space to tell us we can't be doing this or we're not the ones to do this. And yet, the twin pandemics of COVID-19 and racism have really forced our hand. And we're not willing to wait any longer for this work to be done. And we think we've felt the same sentiment throughout our community, especially in the last year and a half. We would love for this rubric to be nullified by pre-existing efforts, but in our year and a half of research, we found no other comparable tool of this breadth for campus use. Though we've drawn, as my colleagues have said, upon many resources created by BIPOC-led organizations, community leaders, and scholars. We're here today giving this presentation because we know we cannot proceed in this effort alone. We now require your critical attention to improve this tool and make it a viable and trusted resource. If you do have resources to contribute, and by that I mean previous iterations of this project that you might be aware of, or previous versions of this idea, please do send them to us. And now I'll turn this over to Gavin, who will start describing the rubric's goals.
Yes. Okay. I think it's important to realize that one of the things that got us to the point of wanting to do this rubric was, I think we were familiar with a thing that UW-Madison has, and I believe they're called the Green Team. Basically, people who come in and they judge your events or your campus units to see how sustainable you are, how kind of in accordance with climate neutrality you are. And they have a whole rubric. Yes, it's the Office of Sustainability. Thanks, Haley. So the rubric kind of was inspired by this, okay, we have an event. How climate neutral is it? How green is our footprint? And so that's kind of a way that what we wanted to do was to be able to tell, like, is a campus unit working toward anti-racism? So whether the rubric is ultimately used to externally evaluate or to self-evaluate, we haven't necessarily dictated that there needs to be some sort of external group. This could be very much, an exercise where people are, sitting down and saying, okay, where are we on this? Where are we on that? And they can kind of self-evaluate, or there could be an external group to come in and self-evaluate. I think the point is that people are willing to be vulnerable, to have a discussion, and to see if they've had change over time. So you can kind of sit with this at one point, do kind of a baseline inventory and say, okay, we've scored ourselves from 0, and we're going to talk a little bit about the scoring system, in a second, but people can kind of score themselves now and then score themselves in a year or in 2 years or something like that. We just really hope that the point of this project is to help facilitate conversation about the ways we reinforce racist practices in our departments, and to offer resources that will result in actual change for communities of color and other marginalized groups on our campus. So we have designed the rubric to also have resources in there to say, hey, we're really not doing well around curriculum. So what kinds of resources might there be out there? And this is part of the reason why we need you all's help, is because we found some of these resources, but we also still need some additional resources. But again, just to say that the point of this document is to really see, have we made change over time? We could self-evaluate, we could get an external group. But I'm going to pass it off to Haley now to talk a little bit about our guiding beliefs. So go ahead and take it away, Haley.
Thanks, Gavin. So to be honest, these three guiding beliefs are things that we often found a bit lacking or in need of elevation in our daily work and when we looked at the different categories that we'll describe in a minute. So the first is shared power and mutual respect. So on a campus, this means that not just faculty are part of governance, but all people who are engaged with the university. I think the respect is easier to think about and easier maybe for everybody to get behind, but the shared power is just as important. And if the respect doesn't go along with the shared power, it's really not as meaningful. So we're thinking about power in these like meaningful and concrete ways. So who actually gets to make decisions? How do we know? Is that shared? Whose voices matter and how do they matter? And then of course, how are resources allocated in accordance with shared power? And you'll see as we go through the rubric a bit, resource allocation is a really big piece. So our second guiding belief is transparency and intentional communication. So from our perspective, it seems like the university does a really good job of looking out for itself and promoting what it's doing, but there's not always transparency or intentional communication to everybody, to all the stakeholders involved, and particularly around how decisions are made. And there's also a bit of a lack of humility in the work that goes on at institutions of higher education. So this lack of transparency and intentional communication is often reflected in the values and processes. And a lack of transparency can make real change really challenging, because if you don't know what's actually going on, who has decision-making power, if there's not communication around these pieces, it will be really difficult to move things forward, especially if you are not in a position of power. Our last guiding belief is equitable distribution of resources. Resource distribution is a cornerstone of equity. Is the institution or unit actually putting dollars, people power, and time behind its priorities? Are its values backed up by where its resources are going? We found that talk is pretty easy to accomplish, but material change can be more challenging. So we thought that was an important belief to guide us in our work. So now Aaron's going to talk a bit about our timeline and implementation and the sustainability of our project.
Thanks, Haley. So for this part of the presentation, I just want to go over a little bit about just the realistic timeline, what we're dealing with, and part of what Haley was talking about in terms of transparency, what we want to model here by being very honest and open with you all. So we are still in the progress of creating a first draft, a first full draft, and which will include a glossary of terms and also a resource guide, as Gavin mentioned. A few of our members have not redirected or maybe donated their professional development funds in order for the NINA Collective to review our first draft once completed this fall. The NINA Collective, for those who don't know, they're a cooperative of racial equity consultants seeking to transform, support, and create systems and structures that are built around racial equity. And we're tentatively set to receive their feedback in February, and we're so thrilled that they're able to help us at this early stage of the project. So starting today, we are seeking folks to provide feedback on a draft version of the rubric, and you'll be able to submit feedback through a Google form that's available on our website. That's barkuw.wordpress.com. We'll repeat that in the presentation. These links are now live and available on our website, and we're really opening up the floodgates to you all and welcoming your feedback. So in a few moments, we'll be sharing two concrete examples from our rubric where we are feeling on the right track. And however, when you enter the draft rubric later today or later this week or later this month, you'll see the true nature of our work, which is this is messy work. It's iterative, and it's absolutely, as everyone loves to say now, us building the plane as we're flying it. But I hope that each of you can really appreciate the fact that this is part of the process and something that's rare in higher education, and especially in DEI programs here at UW-Madison, which is that we're publicly beta testing and revising this project in a transparent fashion so you can see the progress as it occurs. So again, you're welcome to submit individual feedback on specific parts of the rubric or general feedback or offer resources that you think should inform our work. And again, you can find that draft and the feedback form at barkuw.wordpress.com. One more thing, we are also seeking a spring pilot group of department leaders who are willing to test drive the rubric in their home departments. So you can contact me directly if you're interested in becoming a pilot unit. So beyond this point of the NENA Collective's feedback and your feedback is a sort of event horizon beyond which we can't see anymore. And it's really up to our collective action together where this rubric takes us. And what the toolkit will ultimately look like, we really don't imagine it to look like a Google spreadsheet forever. And what conversation it sparks in your units and what changes it leads up to. So, you know, this effort really might very well fail. But at least we're here today talking about these issues, and you're here listening and thinking about what potential changes it might lead to in your unit. So now I'll turn it over.
Great. Thanks a lot, Aaron. And this is just like, you're like woefully accurate about where we are right now. And we are so excited to be opening ourselves up to this kind of feedback. And we really do need, I mean, if you're watching this, and I mean, we were just contacted the other day by Marcus Brower from psychology, who has developed a checklist for DEI in different campus departments. So like, we're eager to learn about additional resources out there. So we're real when we say that we do need your help. So a little bit about the structure of the rubric. We have broken it up into 12 categories, domains, however you want to think about it. And I just want to talk through these just a little bit. And as a precursor to say, again, these are not necessarily set in stone. We even see some of these that we're like, oh, should we collapse this one or that one? And we've made a decision not to because of a variety of reasons that I'll tell you those in a second. So number one is funding and budget. How are basically resources allocated in your department? How are those decisions made, and the like? Policy, so anything from administrative policy to travel policies, policies that govern potentially when someone gets a raise, or anything like that. So any policies that your institute center is putting together, or school or college. History, are you aware of your history? This is everything from the building and the space that you're in to, say you have a chair that's named after someone. Who is that person who the chair is named after? Who is that room named after? We just assume that these things are kind of benign, but we never really know if they have a history that we're not aware of. Events, how do you manage events? How do you relate with other events, potentially even sponsor other events on campus? Also, community relationships. To what extent do you have relationships outside your broader center, department, school, institute? And not just that, but in particular, alongside marginalized, historically underrepresented groups in higher education, how are you reaching out, and how is that incorporated into the way that you do work? Curriculum, how is your curriculum set? Who's looking it over? Who is reviewing it? And the answer of, oh, we have this accreditation board that we report to, is not a sufficient answer. So then communication and transparency, how are you relating to the outside world? How are you telling people about what you do? How transparent is your decision making? I think we've all had the experience where our departments just make a decision and we're like, how did that happen? And nobody can ever really give you a good answer. So this hopefully steals, kind of rips the curtain open to say, how are these decisions made and by what criteria are you making them? Performance management and retention is kind of looking at how are you actually judging people's work. Oftentimes in higher education, I hear people say, well, if I'm not being evaluated for it, then I'm not going to do it. And also, how are you judged to be deemed successful in your job? And to what extent, I think a lot of people who are in the DEI space understand that especially predominantly white institutions do a horrible job at retaining people of color in their department centers and institutes. So again, this is like a really important one that we thought we needed to put there. Staff, all staff relations, and you could kind of imagine, kind of anything that staff does, staff workloads, how are staff, recruited, how are staff treated, how are they onboarded, those kinds of things. Faculty, all faculty relations fall under this category. And then the last two, you might find yourself saying, how come these are not collapsed? So students is basically, how are you relating with students? How are you recruiting and retaining students? And really, anything under the banner of student relations, when students feel that they have a grievance, how was that handled? How was it managed? Those kinds of things. And then also, how do you respond to when your students activate themselves and actually stand up against something in the university or even within your own department? So how you're relating or responding to student activism, is it just benign neglect, or is it something that you are actively dealing with in a very, again, open and transparent ways? And you can see a lot of these certainly overlap and intersect in a lot of different areas. So those are the 12 categories that we have come up with. And again, these are not necessarily set in stone, and we'd love to hear your feedback on them. Now I'm going to turn it over to Haley to talk a little bit about the scoring.
Thanks, Gavin. So we co-created these levels as a team, again, drawing on literature from the academy and from the community, and the language of many of the different sources that we worked with. So level 0 is collusion and oppression. So this is a more active level that either there's a total lack of awareness or there is some kind of active oppression that is more intentional. Level 1 is reproducing norms. This is a bit more passive, where you're going along with normative structures and normative culture that's already in place. There might be like some small improvements, but any of these improvements are unlikely to be thoughtful or substantial. Kind of just going along with the flow of what's already in existence without really asking any questions or being critical about what's going on. If there's any change that's made, it's just because the norms around you have changed, rather than somebody in your unit actually thoughtfully changing a structure or system. Level 2 is belonging. So now there is some effort at more meaningful change. There is some care that has been taken to improve policies and practice. Folks are thinking a little bit about what they're doing, what policies are in place, how decisions are being made, and they're trying to improve what's going on. Level 3 is shared power and liberation. So this is the most radical level that we've thought of at this point, and should represent a pretty deep overhaul of traditional policies and practices. Level 3 should be pretty different from earlier levels, and this is our best effort to create a more anti-racist space and work towards liberation. And as Gavin and Aaron have said, we're so excited to work with you all and get feedback about what we're doing. And now we're going to dig into some examples of what our rubric looks like.
All right, thank you, Haley. So this is the first of 2 examples we'd like to show you of individual rows of the rubric. And so I co-wrote this text with Casey Butcher, director of the Public History Project. And ideally, this is how we'd like to proceed, is to contact and work and collaborate with experts in these areas and these categories to co-create the text together. So I hope you'll see as I read this text aloud that there's really an unspoken invitation in the words for you to confront where your unit is currently at, to imagine where your unit could be, and also space for you to question the rubric itself and decide what departmental history means to you. So I'm going to read it aloud now. Please forgive me, but this being a very text-based project, I think it's worth our time to dive in a little bit and sit with the words. So how does your unit acknowledge its own history of racism and oppression? So level 0, oppression and collusion. Our unit does not know its own history of racism and oppression. This unit does not regularly acknowledge this lack to its students, staff, or faculty, nor are there plans for recognition of past bias incidents and policies. The unit actively attempts to deny and or bury colonial history, and individuals from the unit have no understanding of that history. Level 1, reproducing norms. There is a general air of support for efforts made by others on campus to spotlight campus history of racism and oppression. This includes resharing research, resources, and news generated by others who uncover past bias incidents and policies. If someone were to ask a randomly selected individual from that unit, they will have little or vague understanding of that history. Level 2, belonging. Our unit invests funds into efforts to research and archive its history of racism and oppression, though it is not the central organizing body for that research. There is an annual discussion of past bias incidents and policies with faculty, staff, and students. There is passive public acknowledgement of this history, for example, a statement on the website. If someone were to randomly select an individual from that unit, they will have a general understanding of that history. And finally, level 3, shared power and liberation. Our unit leads and funds efforts to research and archive its history of racism and oppression and collaborates with others who are doing this work. Discussion of past bias incidents and policies are regularly acknowledged and discussed with faculty, staff, and students. There is a dynamic public engagement regarding history, for example, seeking out oral history from alumni and statements during public events, in addition to passive statements. If someone were to ask a randomly selected individual from this unit, they will have a comprehensive understanding of that history and will be able to point the asker to resources. And finally, resources. The UW-Madison Public History Project researches and disseminates campus histories related to race and equity. You may request their staff to collaborate on a unit-specific history, followed by a facilitated discussion. So I hope this example really gives you a better idea of where we're headed with this rubric. We're not looking to replicate data-driven inventories of diversity. We're seeking to spark thought and action in areas where your department has direct control, and give you a direct resource as well that will help you in your decision making. And now here is Gavin with next example.
Yeah, okay. Thanks a lot, Aaron. I think that really helps. So the next category is around purchasing. This is one of the kind of funding and budget things. This is one of the things that's under funding and budget. I don't know if you all are familiar with the work of the Anchor Institution Task Force, but you all should probably, if you're interested in how higher education is a source of economic power, you should definitely look into the work of anchor institutions. And so a lot of people, the Democracy Collaborative in particular, is interested in helping universities and colleges think more deeply about their purchasing and what they can do to kind of stand up to racial injustice through economic intervention. So that was kind of the motivation behind the purchasing category. And a lot of people don't really think of your center or department in terms of purchasing. But the category, again, purchasing, what businesses are we purchasing from to provide services we need, such as catering, printing, computer systems, management services, pest control, cleaning, office supplies, etc. I got the motivation not just from the Anchor Institution Task Force, but also we met with a colleague from Cross Management Services who helps kind of manage supplier diversity initiatives in the state of Wisconsin, and they're overseeing supplier diversity initiatives at, for instance, the construction of the new Wisconsin Center in downtown Milwaukee. And so we found out about them, and we were able to kind of work with them to get some ideas. So level 0, oppression and collusion. It's not clear who we purchase from. This is just not discussed. Level 1, reproducing norms. There's an investigation to inventory all UW-Madison vendors and purchasing, but it's not really mentioned regularly in staff meetings. And usually these kind of services, I might add, are kind of relegated to some department administrator who kind of makes these decisions on their own and doesn't really consult other people. Level 2, belonging. Local businesses are used to find vendors in purchasing. There is some discussion about purchasing from BIPOC-led organizations, and sometimes discussions result in purchasing from these organizations. Internal measures are taken to assess the suppliers when making decisions about making purchases. There is a concrete plan to at least purchase 5% of supplies, services, materials from so-called minority-owned businesses. And I really don't like this term, just so you know, but this is a state of Wisconsin term that has been passed through the legislative process. And we know that that is not always the most open and transparent and inclusive process. Again, categorized by the state of Wisconsin, the goal was set by state statute in 1983. This is at least where we're hoping to raise people's awareness of the fact that there is state law that has a statute that says that University of Wisconsin entities should be purchasing 5% of supplies and materials from so-called minority-owned businesses. All right, so level 3, shared power and liberation. Purchasing is done through local businesses with preferences to BIPOC businesses whenever possible. There are active discussions with administrative staff about where supplies come from and how to continue to diversify suppliers. There's a concrete, documented, and publicly available plan to exceed the 5% state minimum goal to purchase supplies, services, materials from so-called minority-owned businesses as categorized by the state statute. It is someone's job to report to the staff on the entity's website and on the entity's website the progress toward that goal. So again, a lot of people might look at the 5% and be like, hey, we're meeting the 5%. Aren't we doing great? Yeah, but you might not really be going as far into the category of shared power and liberation that you could be. And if you're wondering what businesses could we be purchasing from, this is a resource that you could just click on this link and you can find a list of businesses who are officially certified through the process of the state of Wisconsin and through WIDA, who is categorized as a minority-owned business and who kind of counts in this. Now, there's a whole other conversation that we could be having about who actually gets on the list, how difficult is it to be on the list, and that might be a project for you sitting in home or in your office, and you might want to join us in that initiative. But at this point, the rubric is just kind of meant to create awareness and hopefully some momentum toward action. Cross management services. If you do just a Google search, they do a lot of overseeing diversity supplier stuff, specifically for large scale construction projects, because I think construction projects are a little bit more aware of the supplier diversity programs, and they do bids and contracts out to minority-owned businesses. And so they regularly hold webinars and have compliance over is the overall, whoever the entity is, whether it's the state, are they actually contracting with the businesses? There's a lot more oversight, and cross management services is one of those entities that is hired and contracted to oversee supplier diversity programs in some of these large scale construction projects. So the woman who created cross management services was the one who met with us. So we learned a little bit more there. I'm sorry, in regards to purchasing or other issues, when departments run into roadblocks like contracts with vendors who are not diverse, how can we acknowledge these roadblocks in the rubric and work on steps to remove that roadblock? It's a really good question. This is why I think we need a little bit more of the department administrator perspective on our team, because they understand a little bit more about the basically the what do you call them, the interfaces or the platforms through which their departments order supplies and those kinds of things. Some of the stuff, we might not be able, we don't even have vendors for, so we can't do anything. But again, if we're able to reference the state statute and use that as a pushback, hopefully that's the beginning of a roadblock removal there. So Yeah, working around state contracts. I'm sorry, but I don't have a great answer for that. But I know that DDEEA is in touch with the supplier diversity program at the state of Wisconsin. There is a woman who is over the supplier diversity program. And again, we hope that this discussion, you all have great questions. I think I started with our positionality statement to say we are humble. We don't know all the answers. I hope that whoever asked that question is willing to join us in helping understand how do we get around some of these barriers. And yes, I mean, I also hope that we can get out of, for instance, purchasing furniture made with prison labor, for instance, which is another thing that's referenced in the rubric of if your entity is kind of divesting from that entity. I don't even want to say its name. That is using prison labor to produce cheap goods for University of Wisconsin system. But anyway, so I hope that all these people are willing to help join us in helping find answers to these questions. Okay, with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Haley again.
You are indeed, Gavin. Okay, we have been talking with you for quite a while now. And as you can guess, we're really hungry for your feedback and to hear more from you. So we've set up a way that we can get a little feedback just in real time, live in the session. So Gavin, Aaron, please jump in if I'm describing anything incorrectly. But you can click on this link. It's a Padlet link, and it will take you to a space where you can brainstorm around these questions listed on our PowerPoint, but also around the different categories, those 12 categories that we mentioned. So some reflection questions for you. What should be your unit's anti-racist goals? Aaron's jumping around. What aspects of these categories do you think are within your unit's control? What is under your purview? What change can you make? And what changes do you think are actionable within 1 year or 5 years? So we're going to spend about 5 minutes or so just for all of us to take some individual time to reflect on these questions, to think about what we can do, and then to add notes. It's already notes on the Padlet. You're doing great. So I want to make a note about the Padlet. You might need to kind of zoom out on your web browser to see all 12. That's what I had to do to make all 12 show up. But then under each category, just click the little plus button. That's going to bring up a new note, and you can type your notes. So Aaron and Gavin, if I missed anything, jump in. Otherwise, we're going to take around 5 minutes to start populating this Padlet, get some feedback, and then we're going to have more time for questions and answers.
Hey, while everybody's working, I know Aaron had mentioned that we do have a website, and I was just going to, I don't know, can people see our chat? I'm not sure if people can see our chat, but again, it's, okay, it's barcuw, barcuw.wordpress.com. Don't be that person who puts .org, because I tried to do that and it doesn't go. It doesn't go. But it's barcuw.wordpress.com, and on that front page there is a draft of the rubric. So if you all are curious to see exactly what we're talking about here and you want to give some more detailed feedback, the draft of the rubric is on that WordPress website.
I think it's almost been about 5 minutes now. And so in this next phase of this exercise, we thought we'd start to entertain questions again before we talk about final steps. So feel free to start submitting in questions and we'll triage those.
This is great. I'm looking at some of the comments, and there is even one that I see, gosh, I don't think we've thought about culturally appropriate gifts. You know, when we host speakers, sometimes we give them like a gift, and we don't think often, or we don't give gifts because we're like not able to, but it might be actually more culturally appropriate to give someone from a particular cultural group a particular kind of gift versus, you know, UW swag, for instance. So yeah, this is really great feedback.
I agree. I really appreciate the comment. I'll read it out loud. I feel like research is the missing domain, or perhaps you visualize it under one of the others. I work in research administration, the space in which funding, budget, and research overlap, and believe there's a lot of opportunity in this space to explore anti-racist policy development. Absolutely. We haven't talked about that yet, so thank you.
And this is one reason why we really wanted to present here and talk with you all, because we know that we're just a small group bringing our experience and trying to get the expertise of those we can, but our view is still going to be really limited. So thank you so much already. We're getting a lot out of this.
I just saw a question. Yeah, I'm sorry, Aaron, you were about to answer. What role can alumni play? I mean, I don't, certainly we haven't talked about this, but I mean, I'm always open to like have discussions with alumni to figure out if there might be a way that they can help us either review this or help us in some way. I actually had an alumni one time in the program that I run. He read a story about what we do, and he said, hey, I have some evaluation resources, and it seems like your program sometimes gets requests for evaluation resources. And so after kind of vetting him for a little bit, I was like, yeah, we'd love to connect you with our community partners. So we actually had an alumni working on one of our partner projects. And so, I mean, these kinds of things can work really well. So I would say don't hesitate to reach out to us. I would say if you Google any one of our names and then put UW-Madison by it, you can easily find out how to get in touch with us. So yeah, we'd love to entertain the idea of getting alumni involved in some way. And maybe there can even be a separate category. And I don't even think we have alumni relations on here, but that could probably fit into, one of these categories that we have existing.
Yeah, I'll just want to jump on to that, Gavin, and say that obviously alumni play a huge role in decision-making in a lot of units. And so that's a really critical audience or constituency for this project. I think maybe we've concentrated a little too much on like folks on campus, But really, we're inviting feedback and investment from anyone who's interested and invested in UW-Madison anti-racism on campus. So that can include community partners, alumni, anyone who cares and loves UW-Madison. I'm going to address the next question that came in from Brandon Ribordi, asking, how do you feel non-teaching entities that are part of the UW can and should be interacting and supporting work like this? So I'm from the Center for the Humanities, and we're a non-teaching entity. So absolutely, that's why we've stated campus units, and sometimes we slip and say departments, but really we mean units. Everyone who works at UW, I believe, works at a unit of some sort. And so absolutely.
Yeah, and same with me. I do not, we're not a teaching unit. We have a partnership with where we have taught one class before, but we just started doing that. And so for our first 5 years, we were not a teaching entity, but I look through all these categories and think like, yep, we interact with students in some way. We make decisions about where we purchase goods and services from. We have an advisory board of people. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there are a bunch of different things that could be very relevant. Haley, you were going to say something.
I was just going to kind of add on to what you both said and say, there's more questions. Okay. That this rubric is really for all of us, and it's thinking about what do I have control over, or where could I lobby for change, and recognizing that the work of equity and justice is work that we all need to do, and we can't wait for somebody else to do it or think that maybe it's not our role. It's doing what you can with what you have where you're at. And then there's also a question about not having administrative power. I guess my answer is going to be a little bit the same as, where do you have control, or where could you lobby for change? Aaron and Gavin, you might have some other thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the comments on the Padlet was a suggestion that we kind of separate curriculum from pedagogy. And so that might make this rubric even more relevant to somebody who is, as Kel puts this, a lecturer. How could they utilize it since they don't have administrative power? This definitely could be, Kel, a way to kind of do a personal evaluation of how you're approaching teaching in a liberatory way. I mean, one way to do liberatory pedagogy is to do community-based learning activities that really welcome in community wisdom into your classroom. And so that could be one really good concrete suggestion for a way that we could improve the rubric to include things like that, to include, teaching strategies. There might even be some stuff in the rubric about teaching pedagogy. I'm not, I didn't work on that section, so I don't know it as well. But I don't know if, Aaron, is there anything else you want to add about the lecturer thing? No. Okay. Marcus asked, sometimes the goal is to change attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors of the movable middle. Do you feel that the language is chosen in your rubric, language to the target audience will be receptive to? It's a really good question, Marcus, and that's not necessarily, we didn't write it to like an audience of people who might be skeptical of anti-racism work. This is the anti-racist rubric. So we didn't really want to tiptoe around things. That said, we've actually had that question come up at one of the presentations we just did at Toward One Wisconsin of like, hey, my institution's a little bit more conservative in the sense, I'm going to put that in quotes, conservative in the sense that they're like nervous about making big decisions. We even work with community partners who won't use the word anti-racism, but they will use diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, there's all this kind of stuff that we do need to be thinking about, Marcus. And so, if you might have someone that you have in mind who you can think of who might be able to give us some good concrete suggestions on better ways to provide that language and for how to frame some of these issues, we'd be eager to hear that. Yes.
Hey, Gavin.
Yep.
So I have a suggestion. I think it's been about 10 minutes now. And so I'd love to move on to our final slide, which kind of talks about the final next steps, because I'm seeing a bunch of questions related to that. And then we can take more questions. How about that?
Sure.
Yeah. So Overall, thank you so much for being here with us today, providing your time, energy, and most of all, your emotions needed to process what we're introducing. So again, we need your support and help to move forward with this effort, obviously. And we have different levels of support based on your capacity to do so. So one, you could help by providing direct feedback on individual lines by viewing the rubric and using the accompanying feedback form on our website. As I hope is very clear by now, everyone on this campus has their own lived experience in order to comment and contribute potential edits, which we are ready to review and implement in a timely fashion. So again, the website URL is right there. Two, if you have more time, consider helping us transform this document into an actual toolkit. You can do so by becoming a member of BARC or volunteer your unit as a pilot unit for beta testing. You can find out more information about BARC on our website, or you can email me directly and we'll find a way to orient and possibly onboard you into our coalition. If you have less time but are in a position of power, please consider becoming an advisory member of BARC and help us make strategic decisions. I see a question in the chat already about how do we move forward with something that's such a broad project, and that really we're going to have to lean upon a broad coalition of people in order to move forward. So we're seeking those who can help us find more actual staff time. Like I said before, we're doing this outside of our regular jobs just because this is a passion of ours. But we're looking for staff time, funding, resources to create this rubric and toolkit. So that's all I have prepared, and we're happy to go back to questions, or Gavin and Haley, please feel free to take over.
I was going to say, I see Haley had already started taking one of the questions about university housing, dining, and culinary services. We'd absolutely love to have somebody on here. But just so you all know, there are several questions that are related to facilities. So for instance, the history part that Aaron talked about, I know that, a big part of housing is facilities and facilities management, and also managing students and student engagement. So I think a lot of the pieces of our rubric are well suited to be talking about that, as well as dining and culinary services. Where are you getting your food from? What kinds of food what kinds of decisions are you making even about the kind of food that you're preparing, or what your offerings are going to be? You don't necessarily have to be teaching something, but you are making decisions about what to do every day. So I think that there are parts of our rubric that could be very still applicable there. I don't know if somebody wants to tackle the next question. I feel like I'm talking too much.
Kevin, I appreciate everything that you're sharing. And you can maybe talk a little bit more about pushback, but I'll just say briefly, I think we've heard a bit that we should stay in our lane, and that this isn't, necessarily like, as we've talked about, we're doing this outside of our normal work. And in addition to that, and what we've tried to do is, as you have heard through our process, is really bring in expertise, as much expertise as we can. We're working with external experts, community experts, as reviewers to help us make this as robust and useful, and we're happy to work with you all. So I guess we kind of see equity and justice as everybody's lane. So that's a bit of the pushback we've gotten. And then, as Gavin had said, there are some folks and units and entities that maybe just aren't ready to start thinking about this in such a radical way. And we can there was another question, is this Padlet going to be available going forward? Yes, we can keep the Padlet open for you all to use. That link will stay open for you.
Yeah, I would definitely say some of the pushback that we get that I personally, so part of our, the BARC effort was to kind of go around and do informational kind of one-on-ones following the community organizing approach with upper level admins. And, I met with one administrator, I'm not going to mention their name, of course, but, we were talking about standing up for the student demands, and, it was very much like, oh, students are always going to be complaining about something. nothing they could do. So it's like all these, you always hear criticisms. You're never going to be able to be perfect. So there's that. And then of course the criticism that we got, and Marcus even kind of brought it up about using language that might be too harsh. And we might need to soften our language for institutions who might not necessarily be ready for this kind of work. I mean, at this point, we've just kind of said like, hey, if you don't feel like you're ready, do your own work and then come back and get in a place where you might be able to be ready. But I do think Marcus brings up a great point that we might want to look at softening some of the language. But yeah, we've had another question come up about the rubric is quite broad, which is fantastic. Stephanie mentioned, but it creates a huge amount of information required to complete it properly. Do you have recommendations about how to tackle such a large project without having an individual with this as their sole responsibility? Do it piece by piece, prioritize. I would certainly say if you can, perhaps leaning on an outside entity that you're willing to pay that's led by someone who might be BIPOC. Would be a really great step if you're able to do that. But certainly, I mean, yeah, piece by piece prioritization, things that you think are most relevant to you and your entity's core work, start there and then see if, there's a way that you might be able to do it. I also if you do happen to work for a department that's an academic department that does teaching, sometimes there are faculty members who are tenured and they're, kind of have an established career. I know sometimes in the community engaged scholarship world, sometimes those are the people that we lean on to say, hey, kind of set the example for some of the younger faculty who are, kind of up against the tenure clock and those kinds of things. So maybe there's a faculty member who's well established in their career who you might be able to, use as an ally to lead some of this effort. Maybe somebody who has the department's respect and admiration for that. So yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks. And I just really want to add here that obviously there are no rules here. We just made this up. This is really a passion project. So this is not an official UW effort. So you can do what you want with it. You as an individual have all the power to take our rubric in draft form and take pieces of it that you think can empower you to create some change in your unit. That's really what we're trying to enact here. And I was talking with my husband last night about this presentation and this project, and he reminded me that in every meeting he's ever been in at UW about DEI, folks want to create some change, but are typically at a loss on how to move forward. They don't know where to start. And so really we're offering you a place to start, a foundation of questions, of language, of levels, in order to spark conversation for yourself. It could be just yourself. It could be just your staff. It could be your whole department. It could be a subgroup. It could be, a lot of different things. But we want to create this platform in order for you to be able to think about these things in a more structured way. And yes, sometimes our language can be a little, maybe too much than for some people. But again, I want to reiterate that we see ourselves as a radical group. We're a non-UW group. And the language we're using is based on our research led by BIPOC organizations and leadership. It doesn't come out of nowhere, and we didn't choose these words willy-nilly. So I hope you can respect that.
There's another question that Jessica Benton asked. Once the data has been compiled and analyzed, how are the results going to be included in strategic planning and implementation? I mean, that's kind of up to the entity to figure out how that's going to move forward. We would also love to work with groups like DDEEA to figure out if there might be a way to incorporate things like this into future strategic planning and implementation. I think we've mentioned that there is already some reporting around campus entities and what they do for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that's a great thing to understand the inventorying and where people are right now. But hopefully this could be an additional tool that groups like, DEI groups in individual colleges or even campus-wide might be able to then use these data for strategic planning and implementation. I mean, Jessica, that's exactly why we're hoping to do some rubric like this, is to influence and inform strategic planning and implementation in different campus units, centers, departments, schools, colleges. So yeah, it's a really great point, and that's what we're hoping for. Somebody want to tackle the next question that Anna Vembu asked?
Okay. Anna Bamboo Julian asks, Aaron, I wonder if this group has worked with shared governance. Is this the question you're talking about, Gavin? Yeah, okay. Specifically, the PPPC committee reviews policy and might have a big impact on employees. I'm not familiar with this group, and I'll just echo my colleagues here in saying that we would love to. Obviously, there's so much overlap with this project with all sectors of campus, and shared governance would be a huge step forward for us. If you would like to connect us, please be in touch. We would love that. Yes.
Yeah, and I'll just say that, like, some of the reasons why we haven't really made these connections that you all are, wonderfully pointing out, we absolutely love it, is that we're, it's not ready for prime time yet. We feel like we're not necessarily like done with everything, but we feel like now we're at a point where we're kind of using this as like a focal point of like, let's get the rubric and like some kind of at least draft format to where we can post it on our website and then start the conversation more broadly. So Anna, to your point, I mean, we absolutely love to be engaged with that, and we feel like we're at a better place, and we hope that this is a huge recruitment flood for us, that we're going to have more people who are coming in, being willing to take different tasks for us. And so, Anna, maybe you're the person to take it to shared governance and be able to help give it legs. So I would say, just like any other good community-based organization that I've been a part of, if you ask the question, maybe you're the first volunteer to do that. So that's really great. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
Oh, sorry. I realized I was unmuted, but I'll take the next one. Jessica Benton asked, will this rubric toolkit be shared with others in the UW system? So we've already presented this project twice, actually, at Toward One Wisconsin conference, and where we've made some contacts with other UW system, specifically DEI staff. So yes, that is an interest of ours to share this toolkit widely, especially in Wisconsin. But for now, we're very much concentrating on UW-Madison because that is our home. And this sort of work needs to be extremely site-specific, we believe, because we have our own specific culture here at UW-Madison. We want to make the rubric work as well as it can be and prepare it as well as we can for our community.
Haley, do you want to take Mary Michaud's question? I just feel like Aaron and I have been talking a lot.
Thank you, Mary. So the question Mary asked was, the rubric does illustrate a lot of options, which is great because that means it's flexible. The nature of institutional change over time is nearly always layered. I'm curious about a collective effort about evaluating in formative ways these changes over time. Mary, I think you need to join our group so you can help us figure that question out. We're imagining this as a living document and figuring out what does data collection look like, and then how can that data be used over time is something that we need to explore.
And I do think I mentioned during the presentation that the point is hopefully that you all do this once, your entity does it once and then gets like a baseline and then can kind of score yourself, the next year and see how much progress you've made based on a work plan that you were able to create. Again, since we don't necessarily have, I don't know if it's fair to say we don't have buy-in, but at least this has not been adopted by UW in any kind of formal way. Perhaps if it were adopted by UW in some formal way, such as with the Office of Sustainability doing like this kind of green team assessment of your events being, carbon neutral or whatever, maybe there is a way that we could kind of long-term track that, Mary. that the institution does keep track of. We would absolutely love it if we were able to inform and influence the institution in that way. But that's kind of a dream. At this point, we would need people to get on board with it institutionally and adopt this as a way that people are reporting on year after year, or every other year, something like that. So great.
Thanks, Gavin. I want to ask a question in the chat from Mel Freitag. Do you have recommendations for who fills it out in the organization? For example, leaders or committees may rate the org differently than students, which I think reiterates our point that this isn't the work of any one person. And if you are doing some evaluation of your department or unit, hopefully you're having representation from different roles at different levels of leadership within the organization, and being mindful of whose voices are represented or who are not, whose voices aren't represented. I also wanted to make a point from some of our other collaborators who are mentioning that this is just a smaller, the presenters here today, the three of us, are a representation of a larger group that's working on this, which is a subsection of an even larger group that represents BARC generally. And one of our collaborators mentioned that while we're talking a lot about anti-racism in our language, this rubric is trying to focus on anti-oppression more broadly. And we know that we have more work to do around different kinds of oppression, but I just wanted to say that. And there was a question around a community of practice. If you look at our BARC website, you'll see that BARC does facilitate an anti-racism community of practice. So that might be for you, Sarah, asking the question around if this could be the basis for a dedicated COP. I think we maybe have a space that you could jump right into. So please do take a look at our website and see what other resources are there for you or where you might be able to jump in.
And I want to add to Mel Freitag's question that we've talked to many people, but there are not too many faculty members at this point. But one standout faculty member we've been collaborating with is Sue Robinson from Journalism Mass Communication. And my recommendation, I really agree with Haley in saying that your participation in this could come from one person, multiple people, leadership, not students. But one model might be Sue Robinson is the head, I don't know if the active head, but of their DEI committee. And so each unit, or at least each department, typically has a DEI committee. And so that might be one place to start. And I think they've done a really great job of holding town halls and following up on student requests or questions or demands, and issuing like a white paper after each year that describes in a really transparent fashion what the demands were, how they responded, what the results, what the next steps are going to be. So that might be one place to start of many.
And I think Sue has joined us. She's in this session. So thanks, Sue, for being here. And I think we're being told that we should probably wrap things up at this point. So go ahead, Aaron. Can you wrap us up?
Okay, I think that's it, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I think you know how to be in touch. Please be in touch. Again, we'll leave this Padlet open for you all to use. And we'll be working very hard on making this the best we can. And thank you so much for being here with us today.